White House defending its actions tonight after swapping Army Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. Now, the swap was for 5 of the Taliban's highest-ranking leaders who are being held at Guantanamo Bay. There is debate right now over whether the exchange was good or bad for American policy, but also if it was even legal. And some say Bergdahl, he's no hero, and he ought to be tried here after he receives full treatment and he goes through, obviously, all the psychological decompression, as you can figure, after 5 years. A lot of his fellow soldiers from his old unit say he was on guard duty when he walked away from the post unarmed. They also say other soldiers, they died while searching for him. Now, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel says he stands behind the White House and its move to rescue Bergdahl. This is what he had to say, and this was his exact quote. And many may remember the former Nebraska senator, a decorated veteran in his own right from Vietnam, speaking about his war experience at the time, saying that when you can bring one of your own people home, when you think of what he has endured the last 5 years, my own experiences in Vietnam as we had POWs taken, I'm intensely happy and grateful. All right, let's bring in our panel right now. Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Ona College and also professor of campaign management at NYU, along with, of course, Dominic Carter, he with the sunny disposition, political journalist and author. Mike Lyons, who you met before, retired Army major, military analyst and senior fellow at the Truman National Security Project, and Andrew Whitman, another ray of sunshine, our senior political correspondent. Yes, there you go. All right, guys. Mike surprised me a little bit in that saying, you know what, he may not be destined here to have medals put on his chest here, this guy, and even worse here, there may be an investigation when all is said and done for his actions, but you never leave the man behind. But people died trying to get this guy. We're setting, we always say we don't negotiate with terrorists. We showed history says we have in the past in selective things, but it is a new standard right now, and Congress can argue, hey, you at least should have run this thing by us. The president didn't even go to the Intelligence Committee chairs and let him know what was going on. That said, I'm putting you in the Oval Office in the big chair, Jeannie. Do you do the same thing as the president?
It's very dangerous of you to do, Richard.
Yes.
But
on so many
this is such a tough situation. Number one, we don't know the facts. I mean, we don't know how he was captured. We don't know if he was AWOL. We don't know if he left on his own accord. We don't know if he was taken. That's number one.
We also don't know his health, because there's varying accounts how bad he was.
His mental health.
Yeah.
You don't know his health after the 5 years. And listen, the ends of wars are always messy. And as much as we like to say we do not negotiate with terrorists, we do. And so do many other countries. We've seen Israel do it. So, it is very, very difficult for us to say, here is a guy that we can save and we're going to walk away. So in defense of the president, it is very tough. That said, I think there has to be a congressional investigation after he's home and he's in good care. There has to be a congressional investigation to get to the bottom of this and to see what happened and what the circumstances were. But how could you look at that family and say, we're going to leave that kid behind? Or young man behind.
So the answer is, you would have done what the president did.
I probably would have, but we don't know.
Long, very well spoken.
Richard,
right.
I would be a very, very talkative president, Richard.
Can tell.
I wouldn't think twice about it. I would do exactly what this president did. There are necessary evils that you must do when you're the president of the United States. I understand the constitutional argument and going before Congress, but just imagine the reaction, Richard, if the American people found out down the road that the government, we understand that the government doesn't negotiate with terrorists and so on, but if they had an opportunity to get this young man and declined, and unfortunately he was murdered.
Or more likely,
or
if
killed.
they went and then it got out in the media,
right,
then any chance of a deal would have been done, because everybody would have weighed in and said, wait, is 5-1 the right number? Should it be 1-1? Who are these guys?
See, Dominic's going to be a more decisive president.
Andrew, one thing that surprised me is we always think of the Israeli military as the toughest, hard-edged, out of necessity and everything else. But we saw a trade that they made where it was 1,000-1.
They do it all the time.
1,000-1 in terms of one of their own, and 1,000, terrorists or Palestinian fighters that they traded to get their one back. I asked the same question. Would you have done it?
Yeah, I probably would have. I again, like everybody else, I don't know the specifics of what happened, but you certainly don't want the negative images of some harm coming to an American and being photographed or being splashed around for propaganda purposes. I'm a little suspicious of the criticism here because it seems to be falling on the standard lines that we've been seeing throughout the Obama administration. The people who you would have guessed going into this would be criticizing the White House are criticizing the White House. So to me, that almost takes away some of the debate. It makes me think that some of this is just being blown up as part of the
I think
standard
a lot of
debate.
it
and all
has to
this.
do with
And
who this guy is, Bergdahl. If it was,
But there's one
yeah.
more point, which is a lot of the people who are criticizing the White House right now were up in arms over Benghazi. 4 Americans dead. 4 Americans dead. You didn't do enough to protect 4 Americans. We just went and got 1 American, and what did we trade for him? Some people who were in Gitmo who we were never going to do anything with anyway. We're not going to try the people in Gitmo. We're having all sorts of problems doing that. We're not going to just send them home for nothing.
But
We're not going
can
to
I
bring
just
them to the
play
United States.
devil's advocate for 1 second? There is a school of thought which is suggesting this is his first track to closing Guantanamo Bay, that he wanted to show he could take action without congressional approval, and he's going to move as far as he can to close Guantanamo Bay in the next year or so. So there is that concern, and also the concern that you let these 5 people go, they sit there for a year, and you don't know what happens to them. Do you endanger more Americans as a result of their release? So there is another school of thought. I mean, I agree, it's along partisan lines now, but there are arguments on both sides.
We've been releasing people from Gitmo. Right now, the only law about Gitmo is you can't bring the people here to the mainland.
Yeah, but Congress agreed to that last year. They can't do anything to go back on that now, and so they are.
I don't think there's enough political capital that the president can shut Gitmo in the next 2.5 years. But Mike, you were going to say something?
First of all, the mission to get him was very risky. I mean, they took a squadron of helicopters there. They had special forces on the ground. He could have been wired up in a suicide vest. This could have gone south very quickly. So the president did take some risk when he decided to go after him when he did. So I think
dozens of commandos, they said,
yeah,
right?
I mean, so in places, in this place in Pakistan, I mean, we've seen rescue missions go poorly before in our country. So, and to the point about these 5 guys, I have a hard time thinking these people are going to be a threat to the United States. They can go back and do all they want. They've been off the battlefield for 9 years. They're not going to create an army. They can't mobilize anything. I'm just having a hard time. Our country is afraid
But I
of 5
think
guys.
the professor's referring to the hostility that they've developed while being in Gitmo.
And so think about that. So if they were tortured, they now can tell the story. They could tell the story of what it's like to be inside that prison. So we obviously are not afraid of that story to be told either. And so, and then talking to other people, these 5 weren't even set to be tried. So what were we going to do with them anyway? So there's people there up for trial that I can see not releasing them. But these 5, we had nothing to do with.
And
them.
also, I've heard for a year in Qatar, they're going to be under basically observation. You might learn something over the next 12 months with them. But that all said, next time an American's captured, will the next president or this president who's ever in the Oval Office have to ask permission? Is part of the fallout of this that this is part of the executive powers, or that the president's going to have to go to whether the speaker advise, or does he have to advise and get consent the next time he goes save one of our own?
From my perspective, I hope not. He is the commander-in-chief. He gets to make this decision. He or she gets to make this decision in the future. I think that if he had better relationships with the people in Congress, with the speaker, even the Democrats, even his own party, perhaps he would have let it know. But at this point, sometimes he has to act in this manner that he does.
I agree.
All right, listen, we can spend an hour on it, but it drives me crazy when Dick Cheney, who had better things to do than serve in the military when his number came up, okay, loves to talk about who's the tough guy and who's not, and who's weak and who isn't. However, we go back in history and we look at Iran-Contra when Reagan, and we just played the soundbite, said things got out of hand, we went too far, this isn't who we are. But there was an argument that nobody had a second thought that Reagan would have made something a parking lot if guys tried to screw the states. Fair or not, is there a perception, we think, that this president doesn't have the spine to pull the trigger if he had to? I mean, I've heard that in code maybe a little bit over the last few days here, that, you know what, part of the problem is it's this president not tough enough. I think Cheney used the words weak. Is that a perception that's shared out in the world, or does the world say, time out, isn't this the guy who got us Osama or whatever? I'm just curious what the
That
global
is a good
perception
point.
of this president.
That is a good point about Osama bin Laden. If you think this president is weak, why don't you go ask bin Laden?
Or the people in Pakistan who have had drone attacks raining down on them, or the people in Yemen who have had drone attacks raining down on them. I think the complaint is mostly coming from inside the United States. I mean, Mike, you might have a better perspective on this from what...
I think there are some in the world that had, from the European perspective, wish that we had taken a better stand on Syria. I think you're going to see, once this president's out of office, a lot of, I wish I did something different. We saw Bill Clinton do it. I mean, It's not like it's the first time. I do think that there were, like anything else, certain things got out of hand. But in this kind of lane that he's in, I think he's kind of spot on.
Well, I disagree. I have to say, it's not just in the United States. I mean, look at his speech at West Point. He is much more, and I love professors, I am one, he is much more professorial than many people want from a policy perspective. So look at the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Washington Times, the criticism left, right, and center to the speech at West Point. Why? Because tell me what his foreign policy is. It is so difficult to discern. And yeah, in this case, he was decisive. He was decisive. Dominic's absolutely right when he got Osama bin Laden. But tell me what Obama's foreign policy
isn't it
is.
just that different actions call for different reactions, and that there's no one hard, fast rule to every threat?
This may be that we need this president at this time in our history, but everything with him is a response to George Bush. Still, to this day, 6 years in, what is his foreign policy?
You know what?
When do we go in? When
and that
don't we?
is a whole show. But Michael asked this question, pivoting off, and I know we got to hit a break, but is part of it, because I watched the whole address. You were here with us, and it's harder now than at any other time, only because the world seems so much bigger, and you're not dealing with nation states, and we have a military historically that's smaller than it was, but we want to be all things to all people. The reality of where we are right now, people don't want to hear it, but we're more limited than we care to admit, at least in terms of how many places we can put how many troops for how long.
No question. Our military capability is not what we think it is. And what we lack, I believe, is a strategic deterrence. We haven't had that since the fall of the Soviet Union, since those days, and we've struggled in order to get a nation to comply with our actions. That is just above and beyond from a military perspective. We've not been successful with soft power. We've talked about that before.
Yep.
We haven't had this ability to, if we can't export, missiles, we're going to export something else, oil, export something to the point we'll help that nation. We're just not been successful. Now, I do think we're more secure than ever. I don't think that we're in greater danger. It's just that our influence is just not what it used to be.
It's harder to put that footprint wherever you want.
Yeah.
Mike, thank you very much. Okay, when we come back here, there was other news today, and that had to do with the EPA rolling out a new plan to fight climate change by cutting carbon dioxide emissions by 30%. New poll out shows most Americans, they're on board with the regs. However, not everybody is throwing their support behind it, while a lot of House Republicans are saying, hey, this has as much to do with the economy as it does with the melting globe. We'll be right back. Stay with us.